impeachment trial of US President Donald Trump is underway. What will it mean for the administration and the upcoming election? I am Femi Oke and you're in the stream. There is so much to talk about today and we want to hear from you. You can share your thoughts with us in our live YouTube chat and I will bring your comments into the show. Now, Donald Trump faces 2 charges: abuse of power for his role in withholding military aid to Ukraine in order to pressure Kiev into investigating his political rival, Joe Biden. Democrats are laying out their case on that charge on Thursday. And the second charge? Obstruction of Congress, which refers to the Trump administration's efforts to not cooperate with the House of Representatives' impeachment inquiry last year. Have a listen to 2 very different views on why this trial is taking place.
The framers of the Constitution worried then, as we worry today, that a leader might come to power not to carry out the will of the people that he was elected to represent, but to pursue his own interests. They feared that a president would subvert our democracy by abusing the awesome power of his office for his own personal or political gain. And so they devised a remedy as powerful as the evil it was meant to combat: impeachment.
Are we here because of a phone call? Or are we here before this great body because since the president was sworn into office, there was a desire to see him removed?
Here to help us break down all things impeachment from State College, Rachel Sheldon is Associate Professor of History at Pennsylvania State University. She's also Director of the Richard Civil War Era Center. Also happy to have back with us on the stream Rina Shah. She's a former Republican strategist and founder of Loom US. That's a civic engagement initiative. And with me in the studio, a familiar face on Al Jazeera, our correspondent Patty Culhane. No shortage of things to talk about, including the fact that President Trump tweeted and retweeted more times in the last 24 hours than he has done ever, which is remarkable. I want to start with our YouTube audience right here. This is Maswood. Maswood says, how can Trump be impeached? What is the probability of impeachment? Patty, you start.
The conventional wisdom says it's absolutely not going to happen. 20 Republicans would have to find him guilty to have him removed from office. That's a huge number. And the whole overwhelming concept here is Trump is unpopular with the vast majority of Americans, independents, Democrats. He's hugely popular with Republicans. So for those 20 senators to say, yeah, this was impeachable and he needs to go, would almost certainly mean they're out of a job.
Rina, go ahead.
Yeah, so what we saw day before yesterday when they started kicking things off is no Republican senator wanted to sort of defect from the party and say the rules, let's have a discussion about them and talk about what's permissible. Is extra documentation and evidence allowed in? So that sort of set the tone for what I think we are seeing now is that a lot of Republican senators aren't taking this very seriously. There's been a lot of talk from reporters, congressional reporters who say that many Republican senators are leaving their desks, something they're not supposed to do for longer than what would be considered a normal bathroom break. So, look, I think the reality is that a lot of Americans are not watching this happening. And people like myself, who've been very critical of this administration, are seeing the Democrats make a slam dunk, constitutionally sound case against this president and why he should be removed, while Republican lawyers for the president are seriously just tripping over their own 2 feet.
That said, I do want to throw this in there. We don't know how this ends. The reason we don't know how this ends is it would take 4 Republican senators, and there's a few that are retiring, there's a couple that are, up for tough re-elections. If they were to go with the Democrats and say, no, we want to hear from John Bolton, the former national security advisor, or Mick Mulvaney, we don't know what they're going to say. So the president is able to keep Republican senators in line because he has Republican public opinion. If John Bolton was to come out and say something so shocking that his base would walk away from him, well, then nobody knows how this is going to turn out. So it's really suspenseful in Capitol Hill. Who knew?
Rachel.
Yeah, I think it's suspenseful, but I think we kind of need to take a step back and think a little bit about what this process really is. So your questioner asked about whether the president will be impeached, and he was impeached. He was actually already impeached by the House. That's the start of the process. The House passes a formal impeachment, and then the Senate tries him for high crimes and misdemeanors. So the question is whether he will be convicted. And part of the reason why that's an important distinction is that what we're really talking about here is the workings of the democratic process. So it's important that the House has the opportunity to push for impeachment, to pass impeachment articles, and then that the Senate will try the case. Whether he is actually convicted or not, this shows that there can be a democratic process that, in fact, all branches of government are involved in. You have the House, you have the Senate, you also have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is observing, who is sitting and running the trial, essentially, although he's not doing very much at this moment. So what this is really about is the question of whether democracy is going to survive, whether democracy is going to continue as the founders intended. And that is what the real question is behind all of this.
Rachel, and I wanted to, if I could, throw that to you. That's what the Democrats have been arguing to these Republicans, that this is not about the fate of the president. It's about the fate of the democracy. Do you think those claims are overblown? And if not, how are they not? And then what does it look like in the future?
No, I don't think they're overblown. I think they're exactly the question that they need to be asking. This is what the process of impeachment and a trial is about. It's about whether the president of the United States has violated his duty to protect the nation first over his own personal predilections. And that is what the first impeachment trial was about, of Andrew Johnson in 1868. He was impeached for a very similar kind of thing, a specific violation of a law. But the overarching issue was about whether Andrew Johnson was going to uphold democracy in the former Confederate states, the states that had lost the Civil War and were being reconstructed. And that's a similar situation here. Democrats are not just talking about this Ukraine phone call, they're talking about the election of 2020 and safeguarding free and fair elections. Now, there are other issues involved in elections that don't have to do with foreign powers redistricting and voter suppression. But in this particular case, what we're talking about is, will a foreign entity have the power to get involved in elections? And the president has repeatedly said things to make it seem like he wants foreign interference. And that's what this is really about.
Right.
Well, Patty made a great point about, just Democrats making that case about what's this mean for the future. But I hear both sides making that case. I hear Republicans saying, well, from now onward, are we going to be just impeaching presidents because we don't like them from the outset? And Democrats are saying, well, are we going to allow presidents to abuse their power? And I see it that way. I think it's a very clear-cut abuse of power. And I sort of gave Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt until I read that transcript in black and white. When you ask a foreign leader whether they're our ally or our adversary for a favor, and there's a quid pro quo there, that's bribery. And bribery, when a public official commits bribery, is a criminal act. And I just hear Republicans saying this was no high crime here. So you guys just want to remove him. You impeached him, but you want to remove him now because you don't like him and you've never liked him. So let the election express the will of the American people. They will remove him if they don't like him.
Yes, let me just bring this into our conversation. This is from Reuters, and they have a Reuters Ipsos poll. And it says that most Americans here want to see witnesses in the Trump impeachment trial. 72% of people want to see witnesses in this trial. Let me just share this with you. This is from earlier on today from President Donald Trump. The Democrats don't want a witness trade because Shifty Schiff, the Bidens, the fake whistleblower, and his lawyer, the second whistleblower, and it goes on and on and on. So that's the president's take on this. Patty, what's yours? Are we ever going to see witnesses in the next couple of days?
That's why it's so suspenseful. Nobody knows. I mean, the cynic, if I had been in Washington as long as I have been, I should be a cynic, but I'm not.
Right.
But the cynic would say, no, this is going to be like the Kavanaugh vote when Brett Kavanaugh became the Supreme Court justice. Very controversial. And there were a lot of Republicans wringing their hands and saying, oh, I really don't know what to do, but then they voted for him. So the cynic says that's going to happen. I don't know if that's the case here because, like you said, it's hugely popular. More than 40% of Republicans think witnesses want to be called. If they don't call witnesses, that could work against them. Granted, it's a long time till the election, but what do Americans genuinely don't like? The cover-up. Nixon wasn't the crime, the cover-up. Clinton wasn't the crime, it was the cover-up. Republicans would likely have a price to pay if they don't call witnesses. But at the same time, calling witnesses, what does John Bolton know? We think he knows a lot. Because remember, the Ukraine conversation, not the only conversation in a secret safe. There are 2 other world leader conversations, and John Bolton, through his lawyer, says, I know a ton of stuff that none of you know yet. And then he says, but you know what, if you subpoena me, I'll come talk. So he is basically daring them to talk. And he was reported to have given a speech to some bankers, and he said that the reason Trump pulled troops out of Syria was because he has hotels in Turkey. So if he's going to say that to bankers, what's he going to say under oath to U.S. senators?
Rena, are you as excited as Paddy about the prospect of will there be witnesses? Will John Bolton come in and be part of the impeachment hearings? I'm feeling a certain level of why is this not over already yet from you, Rena?
Yeah, I definitely share with you that
you
sentiment,
seem
but I'm
fatigued.
also very excited.
Oh, okay.
I'm also very excited.
Okay,
yeah, no.
because
I think the witnesses is the biggest part. We deserve to see witnesses. The American public deserves to see a fair trial. And see, that's where I think we do know sort of what this leads to. And we can't really draw a parallel with Kavanaugh entirely, because I think what these Republican senators who are particularly vulnerable in their reelections are going to do is say, yeah, sure, let's permit witnesses. And that gives them cover to say we allowed for a fair trial. And I think when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, the fair trial will play out. And at the end of the day, they'll still say, well, we still don't think this really leads to the road or rises to the occasion of removal.
Rena, do you really think that the Republicans there are 4 of them? Because they're starting to send signals that they don't think that there need to be witnesses. They want this over with. But you really think the Republicans are going to find the 4?
Well, I think they will find those 4, because there are more than 4 that are, the public pressure is there. Like you said, it's the overwhelming public pressure that is going to get to them. And in these tough re-elections, I think this is what gives them cover, saying, let's let the witnesses in. And at the end of the day, just like we saw with Senator Susan Collins in her Kavanaugh vote, I think that's where we can draw the parallel. They still choose not to do the right thing because they'll say it just doesn't rise to the occasion.
Rachel, you are frowning so deep. Look, we've got to check out Rachel. Rachel's deeply frowning here. This idea of having witnesses or not having witnesses, are we in a new territory here for impeachment hearings? Not that there have been that many in the United States, but is it usual for there to at least be witnesses in this political trial?
Yeah, so there were witnesses. There were over 40 witnesses in the first impeachment trial, Andrew Johnson. Some of the interest here is reversed, because the folks who did not want Johnson to be convicted were the ones who wanted to bring the trial out further. They wanted it to be longer. They wanted it at least 2 months long, and they got their wish. And they ended up with over 40 witnesses. There were also depositions that were taken in the Clinton impeachment trial. But of course, one of the things that's very different about this trial from the Clinton impeachment trial is that President Clinton had given up so many documents to the House of Representatives ahead of time. And so there was a cache of documents to work with. In not the same case here, right? Several of these witnesses that the Senate wants to hear from, the Democratic senators want to hear from, are people that have not testified before. Whereas in the Clinton trial, they had testified or they had received depositions or documents relating to them. So there isn't really a precedent in our very small amount of impeachment history for what Leader Mitch McConnell is doing. But this is a political process, and that's part of the problem here, right? Politics is not a dirty word, but this is a political, not a legal process. So there is not a standard sort of legal description of what should happen. There's instead a political context in which Mitch McConnell is making decisions about what the Senate ought to do and how to whip his caucus that are going to be reflective of what he thinks is going to be good for them politically. And so there are benefits to the political process and there are drawbacks, and that may be one of them.
Patty, I was hoping you could explain something to me, just because it seems like hypocrisy, the shame of hypocrisy is dead. There's videotape of Mitch McConnell from 1999 saying, in 15 impeachments we've had in this country in its entire history, 2 quit before the trial. The other 13, every single one of them had witnesses. So he's saying that on tape 20 years ago, but now he's like, well, we don't need witnesses. So, Rena, you know Republicans, are they not worried about looking like hypocrites? Because that's like pretty blatantly hypocritical.
They're not worried because, they I don't think expected Donald Trump to make it this long. I mean, in a way, he's like Teflon, he's managed to endure and survive. And so they have hitched their political futures to him. And to the point where certain senators feel like, look, it's not about legacy anymore. It's about winning re-election. And they want to win re-election, obviously, because it's, about self-serving power. But the bigger part is they don't want to draw the ire of this president because he tends to really go off the deep end. I mean, just in this age, in this era we live in, it's all in real time. And I think that's what scares them the most, is drawing the ire of the president, because that's when they know that party financing will collapse. I mean, it just guarantees that it's a nail in the coffin. So I really think that they are fine with being hypocrites. I mean, Republicans for the Rule of Law group that I'm a big supporter of has released so much video of Senators Graham, McConnell, and others just making these statements. And look, none of them care because they try to say it was different then and it's different now. But frankly, I see it to be the same thing. I see it to be an abuse of power. Donald Trump has abused the power of the presidency. And if he's not contained, essentially, at this point, if he gets only a slap on the hand, which was impeachment, then I think he'll do even worse.
Sure. Rena, let me just share a couple of things with you. And you, Rachel, then you can jump right in there. We've got two big dueling hashtags, and I put them on TweetDeck so you can see them side by side. It kind of gives you a sense of what people, certainly who are online, are thinking about right now. We've got hashtag impeachment trial. That is for the trial, and hashtag impeachment hoax, people who don't think the president should be impeached. And they are dueling, obviously, the different way that the country is split on this impeachment hearing. Rachel, when impeachment hearings have happened in the past, what has happened to America in terms of the divisiveness of it?
Well, a lot of this is about public opinion and whether public opinion supports Congress. There were no public opinion polls in the 19th century, the way we think of them today. But Congress was disliked by a lot of folks during the 19th century, particularly before the Civil War, and some extending to the post-war period. Of course, during the Clinton impeachment trial, there was not a lot of support for impeachment or removal, and that played a big role, I think, in the negotiations over what the rules would be. I think a lot of this hypocrisy that we're talking about really extends not just to senators, but to the president's legal team, right? Alan Dershowitz has been saying that high crime and misdemeanor must be an actual crime. It doesn't have to just be a political issue. And so that is not what he said during the Clinton impeachment trial. He said, in fact, the opposite, that it can be a violation of the powers of the presidency. It does not have to be an actual crime. And Dershowitz has specifically hitched his wagon to the argument that Benjamin Robbins Curtis, one of the lawyers for Andrew Johnson, made during the 1868 impeachment trial. So here again is how history is being weaponized to try to make the president's case. In fact, the Democrats are using the history much more effectively. Maybe they could bring it up even more. It might be even more effective in talking about why impeachment happened. So the vice president, Mike Pence, in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago, said that we have to be really appreciative of what happened in the Andrew Johnson trial because a high-minded senator who was a Republican who might have voted for conviction decided not to. And in fact, he was bribed not to do so. And most of the senators who decided not to vote for conviction for Andrew Johnson were folks who were concerned about the succession of power and who were assured by Andrew Johnson that he would stop interfering with Reconstruction.
Guess let me just share. Finish up, Rachel. Let me
I'm just going to say, this is at the heart of the question here, right? Is what is going to happen in a democratic society? How are we going to view the presidency going forward? And you might make the argument that just because Donald Trump is likely not to be convicted does not mean that the impeachment was for nothing.
Okay, so guess, as you can imagine, a very busy conversation going back and forth on YouTube at the moment. The comments are interesting. Danish Khalil, for instance, says, when will the results be declared? Paddy?
We don't know. So we know that the Democrats have 3 days. They're on day 2. Sorry, the days are all kind of running together because they're not stopped. The Republicans get 3. So if they take all of their time, although that to me is the wild card because they haven't pronounced, the president's lawyers haven't made any legal arguments. They're basically reading out his tweets on the Senate floor. And so they might not take their full 3 days. If they start on Saturday, that brings us to Tuesday. Then the senators get 16 hours, I believe it is, to ask questions. But here's the thing that for senators, because you know how much they love to talk, they can't talk. They've got to write the questions down. And the Chief Justice...
Do they have to do it longhand?
Yeah, they have to write it down. And then the Chief Justice, John Roberts, decides if those questions will be asked. So that goes on for 16 hours.
He curates the questions.
He does. He's the moderator. He's the moderator for your daily impeachment. And so they have 16 hours to ask the questions. Then they vote on whether or not they want witnesses and documents.
All right, Rena, from your insider's view, one thing that we need to look out for in the rest of these impeachment hearings, what would you say? Stream viewers, watch out for this. What would it be?
You know, I certainly think it's for, there's something to be said about certain senators, what they're saying online about these House managers, the Democrats.
Which certain senators? I can find them online as you speak, Rena. Go for it. Tell me.
You want me to name them?
Yes.
Of course we got to name names. Okay, so there's Romney of Utah. There's Collins of Maine.
Yes.
And, I think look for Joni Ernst as well. She's another sort of like quiet one that people don't really hear about too often, but she's a conservative. There's also Martha McSally, who is in Senator John McCain's old seat. She's in Arizona. Look out for some of what they put out there. Murkowski,
Patty says
absolutely.
Murkowski. Yes, yeah. All right.
But, she's kind of one of those that kind of hides behind her cards until the last minute.
Cory Gardner, Colorado.
There's Cory Gardner of Colorado, absolutely.
Joni Ernst, I just don't see. She's so into the party, and she's in a very, very safe race right now, isn't she?
She is, but there have been some murmurs in Washington that there might be a defection on her part.
Really?
But again, it's a sort of a long shot, again, because of how much of a conservative stalwart she's been, and she very much expresses liking for this president. But I think there are a couple wild cards out there that we just maybe could be persuaded through this process. And of course, the moderates. And then Joe Manchin of my home state of West Virginia, somebody who's a Democrat in name only, they say.
Rachel, I love that as a historian you can never be wrong. So, from your historian perfectionist perspective, what should we be looking out for in these impeachment hearings? What would you say?
I'm going to point to something that I don't think anyone is really paying. Well, not many people are paying close attention to, and that's John Roberts. Pay attention to John Roberts. So he has an important role to play, right? He's got a role that's not just about moderating, but also about upholding what he wants to demonstrate about the Supreme Court. So Roberts has been very pushy about saying the court is nonpartisan and non-political, specifically.
Rachel, and if people are trying to picture John Roberts, he's just over my right shoulder here.
Yes,
you see him?
He is. Yeah,
all right.
He's the
Tickling
Chief
him
Justice
almost.
of the Supreme Court. Yeah, there he is.
Go ahead.
I think the subject of many memes today, actually, after his admonishing of the senator. So he has this role to play where he wants to promote the Supreme Court as unbiased, as apolitical, and above politics, as an umpire calling balls and strikes. And so he's going to do everything he can to protect the reputation of the Supreme Court in that way. And what that means for what the senators are going to be allowed to do is important. Already, he's admonished the senators for what he called incivility after one of the Democrats made a statement on the floor of the Senate, and has not called out things like lies, full-on lies that members of the Trump team have made. So keeping an eye on him and seeing what he thinks is important or not important to call out is going to be something that we should be paying attention to.
Goodness me. I wish I could have all three of you on speed dial, take you wherever I need to take you the next couple of days. Patty, Rachel, Rena, thank you so much for giving your take on the impeachment hearings, helping us understand it a little bit better. Have a look here on my laptop, ajstream.com. You can follow the Trump impeachment trial day 4, all the latest updates, and of course you can follow Trump impeachment news again at aljazeera.com. Thanks so much for watching. You'll find me always online. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.